Welcome to the February 2025 CIECA webinar, Collision Industry Update, What You Need to Know. I'm Paul Berry, Executive Director for CIECA. The Collision Industry Electronic Commerce Association, or CIECA, develops and promotes electronic communication standards that allow the industry to be more efficient. We also provide webinars like this one to help educate both members and non-members on trends that impact systems, processes, and the exchange of data across the industry. Today's presenter is Greg Horn, Chief Industry Relations Officer at PartsTrader. Greg has experience in multiple aspects of the industry, starting in repair shops for VW and Porsche, and then in insurance leadership with Safeco, The Hartford, GMAC, National Grange, and Leader National. Greg also worked with Mitchell International as the VP of Industry Relations and Data Analytics, where he published Mitchell's Industry Trend Report. Now, if you know Greg, you know that his real passion is cars, and he's owned, in fact, more than 60 vehicles, and he'd love to tell you about them. Well, welcome, Greg. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate the invite and am really looking forward to presenting today. But I do have to thank everybody that is dialed in because I am always humbled when people want to listen to me speak. So without further ado, we're going to look at sort of a broad brush of what's happening in the car industry as a whole and sort of filter down. But I wanted to get started with news from Volkswagen, Honda, Nissan, and lastly, Stellantis. And this is a pie chart that basically identifies all of the brands and sort of their market share. The really interesting thing is that this was actually published by FinShots in 2022. And if you look up at the 12 o'clock position, you'll see Stellantis is the fourth largest automaker by sales globally. A lot has changed since then, and we're going to talk about the financial woes that are plaguing Stellantis and a little bit of product change since Carlos Tavares resigned. The other thing we're going to hit on is the proposed or announced merger between Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi to make what would be the third largest auto producer in terms of automotive volume. And then, as I said, we're going to do a little deep dive on Stellantis. So starting off with Volkswagen Group, this is an interesting thing. If you said the name Cupra to anybody in the US, they would not connect it to a car, most likely. And if you looked at this car, you may assume that it was Chinese. But in fact, Cupra is a Spanish brand that is part of the Volkswagen Group. And they are producing cars throughout Europe and Asia. And they have set their sights on the US. And it's really interesting. They believe in very aggressively attacking the U.S. market. They're in talks with Penske Automotive Group to set up a network of standalone Cupra dealerships. And you got to wonder, does the world need another, or does the U.S. in particular need another brand of small to mid-size SUVs? And I question the same thing. They are built on the MQB platform, the same platform that powers most Volkswagens from the Jetta to the Tiguan on up. And also most of the Audis are on the MQB platform, and Cupra vehicles are also on that same platform. So you're saying there's a lot of overlap. Why do we need this? The interesting thing is that third bullet point is that they are the first planned plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. VW has a pretty big hole in their portfolios in today's world that they don't offer a battery plug-in hybrid vehicle. That may be the way they keep it unique and add some value to the Cupra offering. The other thing is, as we look at potential of tariffs that could be imposed on importing of cars from Europe, they are setting their sights on potentially taking some space in Chattanooga and Puebla, Mexico to produce the Cupra vehicles for the North American market. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the proposed Honda, Nissan, and Mitsubishi merger. This is really interesting. This is kind of a head scratcher to me because, you know, the Honda and Nissan compete head to head in almost every segment. If you look at the Civics, they've got the Sentra. If you look at the Accords, they've got Maximas. So there is a lot of vehicle to vehicle similarity. Now, the only difference is the Ridgeline really doesn't have, that heavy duty truck, whereas the Nissan brands do. But the really interesting thing is that they have announced this merger in a way to fight the ubiquitous Chinese automakers. They think that if they combine these two, they'll have a better shot at keeping that market segment alive, selling to Asia plus the US. They would become the third largest automaker by volume. But some cracks are already appearing in the facade when at the initial announcement news conference, Toshihiro Mibe, who is the CEO of Honda, was asked, what are the synergies? What are the reasons that this makes sense to merge Honda with Nissan? And he actually answered, that's a tough one. I'll have to get back to you. The other announcement earlier this week on Monday was that they proposed news conference announcing their initial plans to merge these brands has been delayed indefinitely. So there may be some very upset people on both company sides. So keep this one in mind. Not every proposed merger actually goes through. This one seems to be hitting some rocky terrain already, so we'll keep an eye out on it. The other thing that was occupying most of my January was the potential strike between the USMX and the International Longshore Workers Association, or the ILAs on the East Coast. And this had the potential to be a really devastating strike for the U.S. economy as a whole, but in particular for the automotive collision repair and mechanical repair industries. Thankfully, everybody is under a 6-year contract. The concessions that the USMX makes, which is the entity that runs and controls the ports on the East and Gulf Coast, was to step away from the commitment to automate several occupied jobs, person-occupied jobs. They stepped away completely from that, which is surprising, but that got them to settle the deal. But it still allows those ports to be less efficient than other ports around the world. We actually rank near last in efficiency of moving cargo from ship to truck or from ship to rail. So this is going to be, no progress for another 6 years. But the situation has been averted. The West Coast is under, through year one of a 6-year contract as well. So we are in good stead. Now, another interesting development, we also were watching very closely the potential strike from EJ Metallwerke against Volkswagen Group. They too have come to an agreement under what they call Zukunft Volkswagen, which is the future of Volkswagen. And the whole reason that VW was pushing this was that they believe that the majority of their assembly done in Germany puts them at a labor cost disadvantage, and it truly does. German healthcare is expensive. German wages are very high. They wanted to shift a significant amount of production to South America and China, and they were able to reach an agreement to trim 734,000 vehicles from the production lines in Germany by 2030. That is a huge savings, 1.5 billion per year. So roughly over the next few years, 4 billion euros saved. Good news, they're back. They're under a contract. It is a long-term contract, so no disruption for VW. If you had listened to one of my webinars in the fall, the reason this was concerning to me is that IG Metallwerke is the union representative for Mercedes-Benz, Audi, Porsche. They represent all of the manufacturers, and therefore they could have had a solidarity strike in their sister companies or in the competing companies and shut down vehicle production throughout Germany. So good news on a settlement. And lastly, Also, the UAW had rattled sabers in the fall of last year over the delays in restarting the Belvidere assembly plant in Illinois and the surprising decision by then CEO Carlos Tavares to say that he was going to build the next generation Dodge Durango in Toluca, Mexico. Thankfully, that decision was reversed after Tavares resigned. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about some of Tavares's decisions. Um, but this is good news for the UAW, and you can see that they have also made some commitments in Toledo and Kokomo as sub-suppliers to the assembly plants in the U.S. So, uh, good news. Looks like financially strapped Stellantis with the U.S. brands will not be under what could have been a really debilitating and potentially bankrupting strike. So, good news all around on that. Which brings us to the next thing: is who is this man? This is Walter P. Chrysler. This was a picture of him in the early 1930s. The reason I bring this up is that we are going to hit the 100th anniversary of the founding of Chrysler Corporation. And Chrysler Corporation came into being when Walter P. Chrysler bought out the ailing Maxwell Car Corporation. The first Chrysler produced was in 1924, but the purchase of American Motor Body Company, not to be confused with American Motors, but American Motor Body Company caused or allowed this company to be founded. And then very quickly after, in 1928, the purchase of the Dodge Brothers Company, as well as splitting up the brands into the tiers to sort of emulate the General Motors, starting off with Chevrolet and ending up with Cadillac. So you had a natural progression. He did that with brands such as Plymouth and DeSoto and then Dodge and on up. But I'm surprised that there hasn't been more of a celebration by the Stellantis group, and in particular the Chrysler Corporation and its brands. But it's still, only February, and we have until June 6th. So look out for that news. Um, and I promise you a little bit of an update on Carlos Tavares. This is a guy that, if you're a Chrysler dealer in the U.S. or a Ram dealer, you do not like this guy. He made some pretty strategic errors, and surprisingly, was forthcoming after he was forced to resign. The board basically um, made him an offer he couldn't refuse, and he had to resign. But in a Fortune magazine, he acknowledged that it was his arrogance that contributed to the company's inability to fix critical issues. Their incredible amount of excess inventory. They have manufacturing problems. They have quality problems. They have a go-to-market problem. And the interesting thing, and I don't think you would see this from an American-born CEO. He is Portuguese, but he literally said, when I am saying we're arrogant, I'm talking about myself and nobody else. I should have acted immediately. That is incredibly insightful and humbling. Um, but did he stay too long? And that's the next question, because Stellantis, in the last 2 months of the year, pulled off a miracle. And part of that was after Tavares's resignation. He was refusing to put cash on the hood of this leftover inventory. And you have to have cash on the hood, uh, sell them cheap and sell them deep kind of thing. And so what you see here is some of the top end Jeep Rubicon and Gladiator models being discounted up to $17,000. There is a Ram store here in my hometown of Salt Lake City that said that he had an untenable problem. He had unsold inventory of 2023 models, 2024 models, and then was being assigned and allotted 2025 inventory to sell, and was just drowning trying to keep these payments afloat to get this inventory sold. But surprisingly, they sold over 100,000 units in November and December. Um, which is pretty phenomenal. Now, the interesting thing is, it looks like when we talk about tariffs, and we're going to delve a little bit more deeply into tariffs and the potential impact, but Stellantis, of all the car makers, probably dodged the biggest bullet by these Mexican and Canadian tariffs being put on hold for 30 days by the administration. Several of the most popular vehicles, Pacificas, Voyagers, Jeeps, Rams, are produced either in Mexico or in Canada and then trucked over to the United States. So all of those vehicles would have been impacted by a 25% tariff. So that would have devastated even further the ability to regain market share. So that seems to be a very fortunate circumstance. To give you an idea, Chrysler now, we used to think of Chrysler as, the 300 and a couple of other vehicles. They're a two-vehicle lineup. And when you look at these vehicles, you're like, isn't that the same car? Actually, it's the Voyager and the Pacifica. Voyager on the left, Pacifica on the right. And you look at them, and in equipment level, there's not a heck of a lot of difference. You can see a little grill and headlamp difference. And the sole big difference is a difference of $2,500. The Voyager is $2,500 cheaper than the Pacifica. And if you say, well, gee, I haven't seen any Voyagers around, just go to an Enterprise rent-a-car lot. I'm sure they have a lot of them there. And Dodge, too, finished up 2024 kind of in the doldrums with sales down overall 29%. They still have two of the slowest selling vehicles in the United States. Starting over here on the left, this is the now discontinued Durango. It is going to be replaced by a similar midsize SUV now called the Stealth. They're borrowing the name from their earlier vehicle, if you remember the Dodge Stealth from back in the day. But to give you an idea, they're slapping a $7,100 discount on the 710 horsepower SRT Hellcat, which lowers the price from $96,000 to a little under $89,000. Way too rich for my blood, but explains, I think, in a little way why there's over 500 unsold inventory of that vehicle. The vehicle on the right still holds the record in the U.S. and has held that for all of 24 and into 25 as the slowest selling vehicle in the U.S. They still have an unsold inventory level of 14,500 vehicles. The Hornet is actually assembled in Italy, and it is based on a Fiat Alfa platform. And I was up at the CIECA conference earlier in the year in Detroit and had made some disparaging comments about the Hornet and was actually cornered is probably not the right word, but approached by a former Stellantis employee who said, you really got to give that car a shake. And I did. I actually went to a Dodge dealership and asked to test drive a Dodge Hornet and was impressed. I have never been under such a high pressure sale in my life. I don't think he was going to let me leave the lot, but offering up to about an $8,000 discount off of MSRP. But I stand corrected. It's a really nice vehicle, and right now should be selling in the $30,000 range. So if you're in the market for something new and different, the Hornet might be a one to look at. Now, the really big news is the Charger. So this is the Charger replacement. The interesting thing is that this vehicle is going to come as an EV or as a gas-powered ICE vehicle and come in a two-door or a four-door. I always had an issue with a previous Charger only being in a four-door because Chargers to me historically have always been two-door cars. The really interesting thing is that part of the Tavares hangover of his decision making is evident in this vehicle. Originally, they were going to launch it as an EV only, and they decided fairly late in the game to equip it with their six-pack model, which is the Hurricane Twin Turbo 6, which is a very high horsepower vehicle. But the problem is that the vehicle cannot do a burnout from a standing position. And Matt McClure, the new Dodge CEO, said that might be changing. He's going to put in a line lock feature to allow the charger to do a burnout from a stop, which is why people buy chargers, apparently. The other thing he hinted at in sort of vague terms was that the SRT model might actually have a Hemi, because that's the other thing a Chrysler always needs is an option for a Hemi. So we'll see, because Tavares was completely against putting that kind of a power plant, a Hemi power plant in a V8 in a Chrysler product. So we'll see if the new Charger actually has an SRT model in next year in 2026 that has a V8. And an update on auto financing trends. These are some scary things. I usually reserve this for my webinars around October and Halloween to scare people. But look at this. This is the average new vehicle loan rate by state. So what it does here is it takes folks' credit rating. So this is new vehicle loan rates. So this is the average of everyone buying and closing a new vehicle loan in 2024, and their credit actually does show up, and that's why you see some of these southern states, and you see the outlier here of New Mexico, really with over 8% as the average loan rate. But what I want you to take away from this graph is that auto rates are really high, and they lead to high monthly payments. And when you have high loan rates like this, you have people that are upside down on their existing car. We see total loss rates still not coming down to sort of pre-COVID levels. They are in the 30+% rate for most insurance carriers. And when you couple that high total loss rate with high interest rates, meaning people are going to be upside down longer, those total losses become even more difficult to settle. Take longer, so rental on total loss vehicles are extended. It's really not a good situation, but the high interest rates lead to another really scary thing. This is another chart brought to us by Edmunds.com, and this shows the percent of loans for folks with a single car payment on their car of over $1,000 a month. Now, this is surprising to me because I absolutely thought it would be California having the highest percentage of people with that high of a car payment because it's such a big car culture state. But look at that. Little Wyoming has the highest average car payment rate, or the highest percentage with most people over $1,000. I guess if you're living in Wyoming, you've got to drive the nicest Lariat XLT King Wrench that you can, or some combination of large pickup, and that's what contributes to it, because you look down at Texas, that's the second highest. So that makes a lot of sense. Really scary, but this too explains why people, when they experience a total loss, are going to be in a state of panic. So my heart goes out to folks at the insurance carriers settling total losses. And interestingly enough, in general automotive news, Honda is really, really coming in from behind. Toyota really launched what we call the solid state battery revolution. They've been working with Samsung for quite a few years on a solid state ceramic battery versus the lithium ion battery that we have now. The solid state battery has several incredible advantages over the current technology. And it really does use, the Honda battery uses a ceramic-like electrolytes instead of the lithium ion liquids. We've seen accidents where the battery pack has been breached, or the battery pack overheats and causes a fire. So it is a much, much safer way to approach powering an EV. And the really why it's a big deal is that Honda is publishing the fact that they think with a level 3 charger that this would have a full charge to 80% from below 20% in 10 minutes and offer a 630-mile range, which is phenomenal. That right there eliminates the biggest objection to EV conquesting from ICE vehicles, which is range anxiety and infrastructure. So if you have a 630-mile range, you can do most road trips pretty well. If you have a 10-minute charge time on top of that, that becomes a very usable vehicle. The other side benefit is that the battery is much lighter weight than the heavy liquid lithium ion. So that is a big advantage. And again, I'm going to give a shameless plug for March 20th. I'm going to be doing a broadcast webinar with Matt Moore at the Highway Loss Data Institute. And he and I are going to explore how heavier vehicles, both EVs and all-wheel drive vehicles, are contributing to higher repair severities for that third party APD loss. So you've got a heavier vehicle because it's either an EV with a heavy battery or it's got all the added weight of all wheel drive and it's hitting at the same speed, but because it's a heavier object, incurring more damage to that vehicle that is being hit. So again, shameless plug. Tune in. We'll get invites out fairly soon on that. The other interesting advantage to this solid state battery is that there is little range loss with temperature extremes. My EV, when it comes below 32 degrees outside Fahrenheit, I actually lose about 30% of my range in my EV. And that would be negligible with a solid state battery. The other thing is that there's no noticeable degradation after a 10-year time span. Honda announced that they are starting production for test vehicles now, but they believe that these would be production ready for the 2030 model year. So phenomenal expense for everybody that said, you know, the EV thing was a phase. The tax credits are the only reason they made as much of a mark as they did. We sold in the US about 1.2 million EVs last year, the highest ever. So it's not really a phase, but I think there does need to be a next step in the development of EVs, and I think this is the one. The other thing is, you know, these things, and people who know me know I love to pick on the Cybertruck, whether I say it was designed on an Etch-a-Sketch or that it looks like a DeLorean whose mother smoked during pregnancy. I am not a big fan of these vehicles. There, I've said it. But an interesting phenomena is that a lot of people are trying to change the looks, improve the looks, what have you, by wrapping these vehicles. And the adhesive that's used in most vinyl wraps is actually reacting with the stainless steel exoskeleton shell of these vehicles. And if you look at the picture on the left with a Huck Finn home, you see this is actually permanently etching and damaging the surface of this, and there is no repair. It's etched in there. You can see the example on the right, which looks a little like sunfade, but is actually etched in there as well. And the exoskeleton, unlike the DeLorean of days of yore, doesn't have a thick enough skin to actually polish using abrasives. So the only option would be to rewrap. I've actually talked with some claims folks who said they have gotten claims. A couple of them, they were the commercial insurer for the wrapping company, and a couple of them received claims from Cybertruck owners saying that their car was ruined. So keep your eye out on those because it is actually the fault of the adhesive. And let me know, you know, drop me a line if you actually get a claim and how you choose to resolve it, because I'd be very interested. Nextly, I think this slide I have changed every day since I wrote it last week because the situation changed very, very quickly. So literally a day after imposing a 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada, the president put a pause on tariffs Monday. And it's interesting because as part of the deal that was hailed as the agreement, Justin Trudeau, the outgoing PM of Canada, just basically said he would carry through with what he had agreed to back in the fall, which was a $1.3 billion plan to reinforce the Canadian border, same amount he pledged last year. Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, also pledged her same plan from last year to battle fentanyl coming into the U.S. But that was enough for the president to put a stop on that, again, to the relief of Stellantis. But the interesting thing is that the Chinese tariffs still are in effect. They went into effect on Monday, and as I checked the phone to see the latest news, they're still in effect out as of now. But to give you an idea, these are the auto plants supplying either full vehicles or partial components to the U.S. So you see not only GM and Chrysler and Ford facilities, but also the major Japanese folks as well. So really amazing amount of production coming in from Canada. If you've been in Detroit, as I was for the last CIECA conference, I could watch the bridge, the Ambassador Bridge, and all of the traffic coming over. So it's a lot of automotive traffic. Same with Mexico. In fact, Mexico, because of the significantly lower labor rates, um, have a lot of assembly plants, and Nissan does quite a bit of assembly, as does Honda and Mazda, but then also Fiat standalone from Chrysler in Mexico, and then we have two existing plants, older plants of Chrysler Group, but Ford, Chevy, Toyota, GM, everybody seems to have a plant. So great news that those tariffs are not going to impact automobile prices. When we looked at what the impact would have been. Now, there is still some talk about the Chinese tariffs, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit of detail. But the thing that I think caught a lot of folks by surprise was that 44% uh, of the OEM, not aftermarket, but OE collision parts are manufactured outside the U.S. and would have been subject to that tariff. Um, Aftermarket parts coming from Taiwan, so aftermarket collision parts as well as the microchips, which are still predominantly produced by Taiwan Semiconductor, will be subject to that 10% tariff. The average number of estimates on a, or sorry, of parts on an estimate is 13.5. Um, and so when you look at that and you look at the impact of those OE parts not being affected, that takes what we had calculated as a potential negative impact or an increase in cost of between 100 and 150 to claim per claim. That just looking at the Chinese tariffs, we feel pretty strongly that it will be a much smaller amount, $20 to $25, because what we're looking at is that the tariff is going to be levied against the distributor in the US that has acquired the part. So it's a 10% tariff against the acquisition price, which is significantly lower than what they sell to the body shop and much, much lower than what the list price is. So it is a 10% on a much smaller denominator. So look for a little bit of an impact. You still will see some impact in the semiconductors and some of the other wiring harnesses and such that are produced in China, but it should be a lower impact overall. Now we want to take a little bit of look overall at parts inflation by part type. And this is a really, really interesting chart because it points out a couple of things. And I want to draw your attention to two major components. One is we look at the purple line down bottom, and that is the overall average of aftermarket parts. But what we did here is we did like for like. We're not going to compare a side piece of OE trim to an aftermarket fender. This is if there's an aftermarket part that's being produced, we're going to find the OE equivalent, OE surplus equivalent, recycled and reman recon, and track that market basket inflationary rate. And really the interesting thing to me is that you see this inflationary rate hit the aftermarket in 2022 during the UAW strike in September, October of 23. I had wondered if the lack of availability of OE parts would cause aftermarket parts prices to spike. You can see that it really didn't. And you can see as we go through 2024, the average price actually went down. When you look at OEM parts, and that is OEM new in that orange, you see a little bit of wave, but you see it start to open up and increase as we finish up 2024. OE surplus is really more reliant on supply and demand because of production reductions from Chrysler Group and some of the others. You start to see the the inflationary rate go up, but that is probably because of the part type being sold in surplus. It's more dependent on the part type being sold, whether it's a headlight or a hood, what have you, versus the actual inflationary rate. And then I wanted to take a little bit more of a detailed look and look at an actual car model. So this is the 2016 to 24 Malibu. We looked at an OEM hood and compared it to a CAPA certified hood as well as an OEM fender and a CAPA certified fender. So we took list or retail price in the PartsTrader system, averaged for the OE, and then the what we call insurer best, which is the most competitive aftermarket part price, and kind of laid them out to compare. And what you can see is that in the case of the CAPA certified hood, we actually see a decrease from 2023. So I didn't put the years on these charts, and I should have, because I'm a data guy. I should remember to do that. But what we did here is we took blue on the hood is 2022, orange 2023, and green is 2024. For the OEM, I wanted to see if we would see on the aftermarket side any sort of decrease in price, because we did see that on the hood. So I extended another year. You see this is through last week in light blue for 2025, but we do not see the corresponding decrease in aftermarket CAPA certified list prices in 2025. Taking a look at Honda, this is one of the most popular. Whoops, I've gone a little bit too far ahead. 2018 to 22 CRV. The interesting thing is you see very much the same behavior where the CAPA certified hood is actually decreased. In this case, it decreased in 2025, not 2024, but it did actually lower in price. The fender, however, did not much. There's a very, very slight decrease in the light blue 2025 chart for the fender. But it shows a couple of things. When we look at the aftermath for the big three of the UAW strike, we saw a lot of their conquest matching part numbers being taken off and not reintroduced to price matching as they were before. Not so much on the Japanese nameplates because they weren't subject to that strike. They didn't have the same motivation to pull conquest matching programs off. But really interesting to do a part-to-part deep dive and look at the market influencers. And if you guys have questions on this, we'll be taking questions at the end. Patty will be reading the questions to me, and I will do my best to answer them. Now, this is another, and I apologize, it's a little bit of an eye chart as well as a donut chart, but what we do here is we look at the PartsTrader number of parts by part type or part condition, as we call it at PartsTrader, and then the manufacturer vehicle of origin, right? So whether it's Asian, domestic, or European, and we look at the share by the number of parts on the repairable estimate over time. And the really interesting thing is, and we'll look initially at the domestic, that one in gray in the middle. We started off in 2020. We have 78% purchased OE without conquest matching. We compare that to today, and it's 67% without conquest matching, but they've grown 3 points from 2020 on conquesting to 13 percentage points of the number of parts going on the estimate. But the biggest expansion overall is the aftermarket part. Same with the Asian, pretty much a similar story. We go from 78, so a 10% decrease in the number of parts going on the estimate for Asian vehicles for OE parts without conquesting, a decent 3 percentage point jump, but more than double on aftermarket. And then we see similar expanses, but to a lesser extent in European. So that gives us sort of an overall holistic look at parts performance, parts inflation, and parts utilization on repairable estimates. And then the last piece of this equation is really to look at the delivery days because, there's been a ton of focus, especially during the strike, during COVID as well, on the median delivery days. And one of the things in the parts trader system that a supplier does is he quotes the buy price to the repair. The insurance company does not see that buy price. They see what the estimate list price would be, but they do not see the buy price. The repairer also is presented with a quote on delivery days. So what we do here is rather than look at just a simple average where that would dilute any one of the outliers. So if, the average estimate has 13 and a half parts and one of those parts is an OE part and it's delayed significantly, if a dish just did a simple average, it would dilute that outlier. So by looking at the median plus 2 standard deviations, which is what you get in that gray bar chart. The simple average is the blue line up in that upper left where it says median delivery days. But when we look at 2 standard deviations beyond that, it gives you, okay, so what is the real impact of outliers? And the good news is that since January of 2023, we've stayed very, very steady, normalizing in April at around that 9.3, 9.5. You can see up in the upper right, this is by market share and by nameplate. So you see anything in that red, you can see Buick is the biggest outlier with the longest median delivery days. Cadillac and Acura come in as there as well. We do a map by state to see if there's any delivery issues, where are these suppliers having issues delivering. But this is for all part types, and you can see the pie chart laying it out. But I split it out and look at OEM parts because this is absolutely what's driving the deliveries days. They're obviously the most common part ordered on an estimate, but you see that 9.5 days or 9.3 days most recently jump to 11.1. When we looked at the UAW strike last year in that September-October timeframe, they jumped to over 17 days. And we did see a shift away from body shops purchasing OE parts during those time periods. We did not see a significant jump during the CDK outage, and I thought we really would, but we really didn't see much of anything. Looking at aftermarket, surprisingly, we do see an overall increase from the first half of 2024 through the end of the year by about half a day overall, but still well with under, it's still able to get those cars repaired without an extension in length of rental. Looking also at recycled, the jump in December, we know that it was related to the uncommon amount of snowfall in the southern states, and that reflected in, when I update the chart for January, we see that as well. The last look before we go to our Q&A is let's look at price matching because I wanted to get a little bit of an insight into the decision making of a body shop. So if they price match and get an OE apart, are they willing to wait for that outlier part? So again, looking up in the upper left quadrant here, we see the simple average, rock solid at under 2 days. So no issue there. But when that outlier, I chose this because it's a price matched OE part. And am I going to wait a significant amount of time to get that part? And the answer is yes, apparently so. Because when we look again back at average aftermarket delivery days, it's about 3.5 days. So this is literally double what that is, and provides, in my mind, a little bit of insight and an interesting thing to look at when body shops are making that decision to to accept and buy that price match part. Is it actually impacting the length of rental? And that's a question that you, as collision repairers and as insurers, can answer. So with that, I'm going to ask Patty to read some of the questions, or as I always like to call it, stump the chump. And we will see. Patty, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions right now.
Okay, so I have stunned everybody into silence, or they fell
Yes.
asleep. I think either of those are bad, bad things.
I think you stunned them.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Greg, just to
Yes.
weigh in, folks, if you do have questions, there is a button on the top of the bar, a Q&A panel button, so please enter your questions there.
We do have a question from Dale Saylor saying, how do I price match on the parts trader question?
How do I price match on the parts trader question? Oh, how do you price match on parts trader? So, um, what what the OE is, so this would be the OE parts department. Um, they would see the price of the incoming part. If the incoming part on the estimate as received from the body shop, CCC, Mitchell, what have you, is an aftermarket, say it's a Kappa certified fender for a Chevy Malibu, the Chevrolet OE parts dealer would see that incoming list price. Again, you don't see as a when you're quoting, you don't see what everyone else is quoting. That is completely separate. You put your best foot forward. You see the incoming part price, and that's what you uh, price match against. And then you're working at a GM dealer. You're likely working in OE Connect's collision link product, so you never leave that, and you're able to submit your claim back to the manufacturer for your conquesting.
This is
Yes.
Stacy, and I'm just wondering, how can our industry stay up to date with all the changes taking place? I know it's challenging, but how do you recommend everyone stays informed?
Yeah, I mean, the press in this industry is actually pretty good. You see Collision Week, repair driven news, a lot of really good news outlets. I'll Auto Body News as well. I'll put in again, I'm the shameless plug guy today. We do a Parts Trader blog. I try to take on more controversial questions on the blog. I love to get people's feedback when I post the blogs. Um, so if you go to partstrader.com and go to the blog, you'll see the most recent blogs. And we usually put about 6 of those up. And I try to refresh those every couple of weeks. And absolutely love a spirited debate. Um, so if you do have any comments, criticisms, please let me know.
Yeah, so we've got a question from John. Do you see many changes in tariffs from South Korea?
That is interesting. South Korea, I think, for a couple of reasons, has been outside of the pending tariff wars. It is, I think, if you've followed South Korean politics, they are in a bit of a mess with their resignation of their recent prime minister. They are a very close ally of us. We have an unusual relationship with North Korea now with the new administration. I don't see that South Korea will be impacted by these potential tariffs, but I could be wrong.
We've got another question about the tariffs from Jean Francis. What is your gut feeling? Will the tariffs be applied fully for Canada/Mexico in 30 days?
Yeah, that is my gut feeling is probably not. And I hearken back to Goldman Sachs CEO before the tariffs were implemented or originally levied on that Sunday. He believed that this was a negotiation tactic, and he gave it only a 25% probability that the tariffs would be in place. I don't know if he gets credit for them being in place one day and then immediately put on hold. To me, the biggest question is, in reality, there isn't much of a difference in what is being done by both the Canadian and Mexican governments to shore up border security versus what was already agreed to before the election. So there's not much of a change. So that's the wild card. Does this administration somehow say, no, you know what? We will want additional concessions, demands, what have you, and put them back either partially or completely in place. That's the thing to watch, I think, is that um, we need to see if there's any news coming out of the administration that is signaling that they want to get more than what they had agreed to put them on hold now.
All right, our next question comes in from Vaughn. Can you elaborate a bit on the potential impact to the Canadian market?
Yeah, so the Canadian market is a couplefold because uh, the Ontario minister Ford actually was really adamant about swift and immediate and very hefty penalties, and so that was going to have a very negative impact because most of the manufacturing, as you saw from our uh, Canadian production map, comes from the province of Ontario. The other thing that is big in the upper Midwest and would really negatively impact gasoline prices is the amount of crude oil that's coming from Canada into the US. Um, that is really the biggest potential. Those are, those swing states all swung red this last election. So I think that is something that this administration is cognizant of and potentially would step back and say, maybe we don't want to um, have those kind of countermeasures, those retaliatory tariffs put in place by the Canadian government as a whole or the province of Ontario in particular. Um, so that is going to be kind of a wait and see. The Canadian collision environment, um, I don't see really much of any impact because again, they're not going to be subject to the Taiwanese tariffs that will be paid by the distributors in the U.S. You do have LKQ Corp with locations in Canada, but it won't be part of the tariffs. Hopefully, I've answered that question for you. If not, follow up with Patty.
All right. Now, Christopher asks us, do you have a breakdown of which area or country parts are sourced from by aftermarket and OEM?
That is a really good question. I have been scouring, trying to get the latest map. I had toyed with the idea, but it is so outdated because it's from 2016, so 9 years ago. And things have changed pretty dramatically. Someone had asked me this morning on another conference call, which of the domestic OEs has the highest Chinese content in manufacturing, and that actually is General Motors. So they are going to, with these 10% tariffs, potentially have the biggest negative impact to pricing because they have the highest Chinese imported content on their vehicles. But yeah, I'm trying to find a good recent valid source, and it is nearly impossible to find.
All righty. We have another question from Fior. What other impacts are you watching besides tariffs and the Belvedere issues?
Yeah, so it has been as most guys probably scan the sports pages on Sunday, I'm reading automotive news and several European publications. We have dodged several bullets with global strikes, port strikes, OE strikes that all seem to have been resolved. So they're really, other than supply chain interruption issues and the impact on microchips, because a big part of the Chinese tariffs, because they impact mainland China, so the Central Communist China, as well as the Republic of China, Taiwan, they're peanut buttered across both, and the microchip production all happens or mostly happens in Taiwan. I look at what is the impact of those tariffs, what is that going to be? The other piece is that the biggest components or materials that go into manufacturing microchips are gallium, germanium, boron, and the biggest producer of those raw materials is China by a long shot. Russia comes as a close well, not really a close second, probably less than half of the production of China. And then comes Canada, of all things, in India farther down the road. But um, if China really gets serious about uh, retaliatory tariffs, because we do have a significant amount of semiconductor microchip production that is going on in Indiana as well as Arizona. You look at the Arizona facility for Taiwanese semiconductor, it is gigantic, and they're building at an incredibly rapid pace, trying to move some of that uh, semiconductor microchip business back into the U.S., but it's still a small portion. So that's really the thing to look at is if there are several raw components for a needed item that are coming from China, that could be a worry. So that's really what I'm working and looking at as we go forward into 2025.
All right. Our next question is from Ray. Any updates on how total loss rates look the last 6 months as used car rates have moderated?
They have, and it's interesting. I would have thought we would have seen, I look at used car values and total loss frequency as sort of the yin and the yang of a total loss equation, and I would have expected that with moderation we would have started to see a stabilization and maybe even a potential decrease in total loss rate, but that really hasn't materialized. I've spoken with a lot of our customers, and they're still saying that the total loss rates are too high. I believe they're too high as well. I think that the insurance companies don't like total losses because JD Power will tell you that the defection rate or the dissatisfaction of an insured when experiencing a total loss is higher. So the total loss customer is much more likely to look for another insurance company when they experience a total loss versus a heavy non-drive total loss repair or heavy non-drive repairable car. The numbers line up that it's still better to repair. Little counterintuitive. I would have always thought that most folks wouldn't want their damaged and repaired car back if it was structural damage. But then I look at the loan rate frequency from our chart earlier, as well as the number of cars with over $1,000 on a car payment. I look at negative equity being rolled into the average new car loan, which is over $4,000 now. Now I can understand why people would want to keep their heavily damaged car and get it back on the road.
All right. We have a question from Chad. What is your outlook on U.S. taking control of the Panama Canal and the impact of the U.S. auto market on the U.S.?
Oh, that is a political minefield, Chad. I appreciate the question. I don't know if the UN or international law would permit that U.S. takeover. Again, not a lot of details around the idea of doing that. But if it is a quote unquote military operation, that could be dicey. Again, not wanting to get into politics at any time, but I just look at it from the world stage and the countries that are member of UN Security Council are almost completely opposed to it. So that could be interesting. I don't believe it'll happen. But hey, like I said, with the tariffs chart and slides, I was updating them every day. So we'll wait and see because it does seem to be changing very quickly.
All right, sounds good. We have a question from Daniel. With high vehicle loan rates persisting, are we observing a further increase in the average age of vehicles on the road?
Yes. Two parts to that. We look at high vehicle loan rates and we look at financing terms, which also, we look at a significant number of cars with an 84-month loan term. Yikes. So when you combine a long loan term, people upside down longer, they don't have the luxury of trading out as often as they used to. And so that all contributes to a longer and older average vehicle age of vehicle on the road. And I think that's probably bringing us to time. Patty, thanks for asking all those questions. Paul and Stacy, I really appreciate the invite. Again, if you have any further questions for me, just write me an email at greg.horn@partstrader.com, and I look forward to answer your questions. Thanks so
Great.
much,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Patty. Much appreciated. As we wrap up, I just want to point out CIECA will once again be hosting our Connects conference this year. We'll be in Nashville, September 24th and 25th. Conference attendees will be able to join a tour of the Nissan plant in Smyrna, Tennessee. You can learn more about Connects 2025 at CIECA.com. And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please feel free to contact me at paul@CIECA.com. And that concludes today's webinar. Thank you.